has not been as effective and as powerful as God has mandated us to be. So, yes, I want to get people saved. I want to get people into the kingdom, but I also want to see the body of Christ raised up, trained, and equipped to do what they've been really created to do. And so that's my charge. That's my calling. That's my heartbeat. And of course, if you want to find out more, you can visit the website ruthhendrickson.org. So that's RUTHHENDRICKSON.org. So, okay, without further ado, keys to enlarging vision. So what happened is the other day I was spending some time with a friend, and many people have their struggles and challenges over the past year, and honestly that statement is true no matter what year it is. Okay, there's always these struggles and these challenges that we come across. We all hit these seasons, and in those seasons of struggles and challenges, God can seem really small and life can seem really overwhelming, right? Okay, God can seem small, life can be overwhelming. And in all of that, we can feel small, we can feel ineffective, we can even feel forgotten about. So this all kind of becomes a swirl that goes around us. And we talk into that quite a bit. But I wanted to take it and look at it also, not only from that angle, but also from the angle of blessing. Because truth be told, this feeling of even God being small or things not being quite right, or suddenly going for a roller coaster ride with our faith, with the things of God, can hit us even in season of blessing. And I think either way, there's times when we can be blindsided. So our faith really has to be solidified. So again, even in times of blessing, it's possible to look around. And as we look around, we can see what's missing. We can see where we don't feel like God's come through. And again, with that, we can consider God small. We can consider ourselves small and insignificant. We can, again, consider ourselves ineffective, forgotten, because things aren't coming together or they're not looking the way that we believe they should look. And in those moments, how we focus, the way that we handle them, really has an impact as to if our vision will become larger or if it will become smaller. And actually, Abram gives us a great lesson with this. If we go to Genesis 15 and begin with right away with verse 1, it says, sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you and your reward will be great. Okay, I want to stop right there. I want to hit the pause button right there. Most of us, if we receive that word, or at least I know for me, if God spoke to me in a very clear vision like that and said, hey, don't be afraid, Ruth, I'm going to protect you. Your reward's going to be great. I'd be high-fiving it. Yes and amen. Like, I would feel so secure in that moment. But I want you to see also, because this is going to become very, very important as we go on to the rest of this chapter, that verse begins with sometime later, sometime later. So when we see that, we need to go back and look at what happened before, because what happened before will have an impact on what we're about to read. So prior to this, what had happened is that Lot, who's Abram's nephew, he had actually been taken captive. And Abram heard about this and went off after him. And he actually recovered all the goods that had been taken. He recovered his nephew Lot and all of Lot's possessions. Lot was also very, very wealthy. He had a lot of possessions, just like Abram. So he found Lot and all his possessions, and all the women, all the children, and everyone else who had been taken captive. In other words, God had given Abram the strength and the favor, and he brought back not some of what had been stolen or taken away, but he brought back all. And you can just say all right now. He brought back all. He brought back all the possessions and all the people. Okay, so it's the full gamut of everything that was stolen. He went and he brought it back. Okay, so then what happens after this is he's on his way back is when actually Abram meets Melchizedek. And Melchizedek goes and blesses him and says, blessed is Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed by God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. So who had defeated all the enemies? Of course, God had, okay? God gave Abram and his men everything he needed to defeat the army that had taken Lot captive along with others. Okay, so again, it was a total victory. Okay, so with that in mind, let's continue into chapter 15. So in verse 2, it says, "But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you have given me no children, Eleazar of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You've given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." Okay, I want to pause again there. Notice the position that Abram had to take to see the goodness of God. He had to actually go outside of his tent or outside of his dwelling. We could say outside the walls of the comfort zone, outside the walls of protection, if you will. Um, so let's assume, although we don't know for sure, like what prayer position he had, he could have. We do know he was in the tent. We do know he was having a conversation with God. He may have been kneeling. He may have been laying on the floor. He might have had his head bowed. He could have been talking to God as he was doing something else. What we know is that he was having a conversation with God. What we know is that he was in his tent. But God had to change his position to change his view. Just hear me now. Sometimes our position has to change in order for our view to change. So God took him outside his dwelling. Not only did he take him outside his dwelling, he told him to look up. Okay, so let's break this down just a bit more. Number one, Abram had to hear God. This was not a one-sided conversation, okay? It was a conversation between two friends, two people who knew each other. If God and Abram. Okay, this wasn't a one-sided conversation. This just wasn't, I sense what the Lord is saying. Like, this was an authentic conversation that Abram was having, period. Okay, there was an exchange going on here. The other thing that had to happen, so number one, that you have to have conversations with God. Okay. Number two, Abram had to change his location. He had to go outside. There are times in our relationship with God that in order to see, hear, or understand the fullness of what God is saying, we actually have to change our physical location. Okay. Hear me. There are times, there are seasons where we have to change our physical location to continue to grow with the Lord. In Abram's case, he had to go outside. Number three, Abram had to change his viewpoint. In other words, when we're down, we can be looking down when we're praying, or even have our eyes closed. We can be looking out and about, but he had to actually look up, so that focal point had to change. Number four, Abram had to look at the impossibilities of God. In other words, God told him to count the stars if you even can. Okay. So number five is Abram had to learn to dream or see things at a different level. In other words, he had to see from God's perspective. He had to dream from the impossibilities rather than the humanly possible. So as we move on, there's actually a pause in this conversation in verse 6, which I find very, very interesting. The scripture states that Abram believed, just say Abram believed. And because he believed, the Lord actually counted it to him as righteousness because of his faith. In other words, they had a conversation. Abram had to make some changes. He had to go outside. He had to look. He had to see. He had to try to count those stars. And he had to come and make a decision as to if he was going to believe God or not. And he stepped into belief. He believed God. Because of this belief, because of that stance, because of the willingness to change, because of the willingness to go outside the tent and look from a different perspective, his faith welled up and God counted that as righteousness. And just say, my faith is counted as righteousness by God. So where's your faith? Where's your focus? And here's a question that can really take us deeper with the Lord. The question is my faith, is your faith so cemented in what God has said that it is counted as righteousness even when we don't see it in the moment? Okay. Let me just ask that again. Is your faith, is my faith so cemented in what God has said, in the promises of God, in the conversations with God, that it's counted to us as righteousness, even if we don't see it happening in the here and now? Okay, really, really important thing to take a look at. And it becomes increasingly important as we take a look at how Abram walked through the rest of this conversation and then out beyond it. So the remainder of chapter 15 is actually a conversation that Abram continues to have with God. And as they converse, God tells Abram about the land that he's giving him. And again, it's a conversation. Abram, even with all this faith that's been welling up, he doesn't just say, "Yes, Lord." He actually asks God how he will know that it will come to pass. In other words, even though God's saying this, Abram's like, "But wait a minute. How will I know that this is going to come to pass?" And so here he had just, here we just had this pause in the middle of the chapter where his faith is counted as righteousness. But right here, we're back to a conversation. And what I want us to know is that God always invites us into conversation with him. He always invites us into conversation. And I love I want to say relaxed atmosphere or relaxed relationship that Abram had with God. Abram had definitely made his mistakes, and trust me, he was going to make a lot more. But he was able to ask the Lord the questions and then get solidified as to where he was at, as to his level of faith. And so we need to understand that God's very approachable. And you can just say God's very approachable. Yes, he's very holy. Yes, he's our judge. All those things come into mandate. Yes, he cannot stand in the face of sin. He turns his head. But we're his kids, and he's always calling us. He's always inviting us into these conversations. And he's always inviting us to enlarge our vision because he wants us to see things the way that he sees them. So sometimes, again, to enlarge our vision means that we have to take a step out of our tent. Great question. Is there a tent that you need to step out of? Or what do I need to step out of in order for my vision to be enlarged? Where do I need to look? How do I need to refocus? So anyways, the rest of chapter 15. So God also shows him some other things. And in the end, he actually goes and he makes a covenant with Abram. So, okay, so stay with me. Let's go back through this again. So number one, we have God taking Abraham outside his tent or his place of comfort in order to change his viewpoint, to change the way he's looking at things. We have Abram's faith being counted to him as righteousness. Okay, so his faith is counted to him as righteousness. We have an ongoing, continuing conversation between God and Abram, and we have a covenant. Now, in our minds, many of us would think that we're all shored up and ready to go, right? Okay, we'd be like, yes, I'm good. And I actually would be thinking at this time that I cannot be moved from the things of God. But there's a necessary lesson that we need to learn from Abram, and that comes with what follows. You see, when we jump into chapter 16, that's actually where Abram agrees to Sarai's plan that he would sleep with Hagar because they haven't seen the fulfillment of the promised child yet. In other words, she hasn't become pregnant with Isaac yet. So therefore, this is where the human understanding, the mindset, let's make this happen. Maybe God needs a little help with the plan comes into play. And so, immediately after all this, or sometime after all this, he steps out of that vision, out of that space or that sphere of faith, and into trying to do things his way in a logical way that seems possible, as opposed to staying focused on the stars and on the impossibilities of God. So with all this, we have keys to enlarging the tent. And of course, we also have a warning. So again, the keys are number one, we have to have conversations to God. We have to know his voice. We have to listen to him. We actually converse. Okay. Number two, there are times when we have to change the location or the focal point. It could be absolutely necessary. We can't just look this way out. We have to change our focus and look up. Sometimes, in other words, we have to step out of the tent or out of our comfort zone or out of our dwelling, sometimes even out of our church. Okay, we have to step out of that place. For some of you, it's a job. We have to step out of that in order to look up and see what the fullness of what God is doing. Number three, we have to believe in the impossibilities of God. In other words, if you know the voice of God, if you know because you know deep down in your knower that God has spoken, that you've had this conversation with him and this is what he said, then stick with what he said. Remind yourself of it. Stand your ground. Let that faith increase. Again, if you need to, go outside and count the stars if you need a reminder. Then again, that warning, even when we feel sure footed and approved by God, if we let our focus slip even for a moment, we can end up going down a path that God didn't intend for us to go to, and we didn't intend to go down. Okay, so that focus aspect, that relationship and the focus aspect and the faith building are all absolutely essential in order to enlarge that vision and to keep on track so that that vision can come to fulfillment. So again, Abram had to hear God. It wasn't a one-sided conversation. Okay, there was a conversation, but he did have to hear. He had to know it was God. He had to step into it. He had to change his location. He had to go outside. He had to change his viewpoint. He had to look up. He had to look at the impossibilities of God. In other words, God told him to count the stars, and he had to learn to dream at a different level. How about you? How are you doing at enlarging the vision God has given you? Do you need to step out of your comfort zone or out of your tent? So if that's you, if this is ministered to you, I just want to encourage you to keep doing that, to keep taking ground, to enlarge that vision. If you're struggling with this, go outside, look at the stars, and really, read through Genesis 15, and then go outside and really look at those stars and ask the Lord to begin to speak to you so that that vision can be enlarged, because you were created to go from glory to glory, to have that vision enlarged as to what God's plans and purposes are for you and for the generations. So don't ever stop short of that, and keep your focus. And you know what? If, like Abram, you've gone and settled for something less or tried to work things out yourself, come back into alignment. We have a wonderful God who forgives and pours forth a lot of mercy, just like you did with Abram if you went through and read the rest of that. So I just want to bless you again. Thank you for joining me today. Please feel free to share this with others. Spread the word. Let them know that we want to grow together. We want to see people set free for the kingdom, for the glory of God. So again, thank you for joining me today. If you want to share this, please, number one, I really appreciate when you share it. It's really great. I just want to say thank you for doing that. And it does really help if you put a little note with it. Yes, hit the share key, but also when you go and put a note with it, hey, share this because this is how it impacted me. It really helps people to grab on and to watch it because they know you and they may not know me. So again, thank you so much for journeying with me. We've been doing this for about a year now. Never thought it would be that long. When I started it, I thought it would be just a short amount of time. But here we are within another month, we'll come upon a year. And I am in awe at the goodness of God, at the power of God, at the favor of God, at the blessing of God. He really is amazing. So anyways, there you go. A key to enlarging your vision. Sometimes you need to take a step out of the tent, out of your comfort zone. He has so much more for you. So don't stop. Stay in the word, keep growing, keep having those conversations, and keep looking up. It's so worth it.